In 360 BC, a man sat down and wrote out the exact coordinates of a lost civilization. Not a vague legend, not a fairy tale passed around a campfire. Actual measurements, an actual location, and an actual date for when it vanished. That man was Plato. And what he described has been argued about for over 2,000 years. But here's the part almost nobody talks about. The location he gave lines up with a real place in the ocean that scientists have confirmed went underwater at almost exactly the time he said it did. Let's get into what Plato actually wrote and what's actually sitting there right now. Most people think Atlantis is just a myth, a made-up story Plato used to teach a lesson about pride and downfall. And that's the safe academic answer, the one you'll get from most professors. But if you actually read what Plato wrote in his two dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, it reads less like a fable and more like a report. He says the story came from Egyptian priests who told it to a Greek statesman named Solon. Solon brought it back to Athens roughly 200 years before Plato was born. Plato is very clear about this. He's not claiming to have invented the story. He's claiming he's passing along something that was told to him as historical fact. So what exactly did he say? He described an island larger than Libya and Asia combined, sitting beyond what he called the Pillars of Hercules. Today, we know that location as the Strait of Gibraltar, the narrow gap of water between southern Spain and northern Morocco, where the Mediterranean Sea opens up into the Atlantic Ocean. That's not a vague direction like somewhere out west. That's an exact, identifiable location that still exists on every map today. He didn't stop there. He described concentric rings of land and water, like a target, with a massive central island holding a temple covered in gold and silver dedicated to Poseidon. He talked about canals, bridges, harbors filled with ships, and an entire civilization built around this layout. And then he gave actual measurements. The central plain, according to Plato, was 3,000 stadia by 2,000 stadia. Convert that into modern units, and you get something like 555 kilometers by 370 kilometers. That is not poetic flourish. That is someone trying to convey precise scale, the way an engineer or a surveyor would. And then comes the ending. Plato says that in a single day and night, the entire island sank into the sea, destroyed by earthquakes and flooding, leaving behind what he called an impassable, impenetrable mud that made the surrounding ocean impossible to sail through afterward. He puts a date on this, roughly 9,600 BC, 9,600 years before his own time, which means we are talking about something that, if true, happened around 11,600 years ago from today. For most of history, that date alone was enough to get this story laughed out of serious academic conversation. 11,000 years ago? Humans were supposedly just hunting mammoths and living in scattered tribes. No cities, no engineering, no advanced civilization, capable of building canal systems and golden temples. So Atlantis got filed away as fiction. A fun story, nothing more. But here's where it gets interesting, because in the last few decades, the picture of what humans were actually capable of, that far back, has changed dramatically. And so has our understanding of what was happening geologically in exactly the location Plato pointed to. Let's start with the location itself, right outside the Strait of Gibraltar in the Atlantic Ocean. off the coast of modern Spain and Portugal. There's a submerged feature called Spartel Bank. Geological surveys using sonar and seismic mapping have confirmed it used to be an island. And it went underwater due to rising sea levels at the end of the last ice age, with the most dramatic submersion events happening in rapid pulses. Not a slow, gradual process, but sudden jumps, especially clustered right around 9,600 BC. That is the exact date Plato gave. Now, Spartel Bank on its own is relatively small compared to the massive island Plato described. So, some researchers argue it could be the last visible remnant, the tip of something much larger that's now completely underwater. Seafloor surveys around that region have picked up features that look like ancient drainage channels and sediment patterns consistent with old riverbeds, structures that some researchers claim resemble man-made canal systems, although that interpretation is still hotly debated. There's another piece to this. In 2011, a research team led by Richard Freund used satellite imagery combined with ground-penetrating radar and underwater scanning technology to investigate marshlands in southern Spain near the city of Cadiz. What they found underneath the mud was the layout of a buried city, with a structure of concentric circles strikingly similar to what Plato described. The theory is that this site in Spain isn't Atlantis itself, but a city built afterward by survivors. Refugees who fled the original catastrophe and recreated the layout of their lost home as a kind of memorial. If that's true, the actual island of Atlantis would have existed further out in the Atlantic, with this Spanish site marking where the survivors eventually resettled. So now, let's talk about the climate science, because this part isn't speculation. This is documented and confirmed. Around 12,800 years ago, the Earth went through a sudden and dramatic climate event known as the Younger Dryas. Ice core samples, sediment layers, and geological evidence from multiple continents all confirm that something catastrophic happened during this period. Global temperatures plummeted rapidly, and evidence points toward a possible comet impact or fragmentation event. That triggered massive flooding as ice sheets melted at an accelerated pace. Here's why the timing matters so much. The end of the Younger Dryas period, somewhere around 9,600 to 9,700 BC, lines up almost perfectly with the exact date Plato gave for the destruction. During this window, sea levels were rising so quickly that entire coastlines were being redrawn within a single human lifetime. Places that were dry and habitable for one generation could be underwater for the next. This was the moment. Which brings us to the bigger question. Could an actual advanced civilization have existed at that time? For decades, mainstream archaeology said absolutely not. Humans, 11,000 years ago, were primitive hunter-gatherers, nowhere near capable of organized engineering projects. But that assumption has been falling apart fast. In 1994, archaeologists uncovered a site in modern-day Turkey called Göbekli Tepe. This place dates back roughly 11,500 years, which puts it about 6,000 years before Stonehenge and 7,000 years before the pyramids. It features massive carved limestone pillars, some weighing over 10 tons, arranged with precision in circular formations, decorated with detailed carvings of animals. This was built by a society that, according to the textbook timeline, shouldn't have had the organization. Göbekli Tepe proved that sophisticated, organized human activity existed thousands of years earlier than we used to teach, right around the same time period Plato described for Atlantis. If people in Turkey were building monuments 11,500 years ago, it's not a stretch for others. And then there's the flood myth problem. Nearly every major civilization on Earth has a story about a catastrophic flood that wiped out a previous world. The Sumerians had Gilgamesh. The Hebrew Bible has Noah. Hindu tradition has Manu. Greek mythology has Deucalion. Across the Americas, from the Aztecs to numerous Native American tribes, flood legends describe the end of a previous era. When dozens of cultures all tell structurally similar stories about a great flood ending a golden age, it looks like a real shared event. So let's bring this back to Plato's exact coordinates. He pointed to a location just beyond the Strait of Gibraltar. Modern geology has confirmed that the exact region underwent significant submersion as sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age. He gave a date, roughly 9,600 BC, that lines up almost perfectly with the end of the Younger Dryas. And thanks to discoveries like Göbekli Tepe, we now know that organized, technologically capable human societies existed during that exact era. None of this proves with absolute certainty that there's a golden temple sitting perfectly preserved at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Mainstream historians will point out that Plato was a philosopher, and he may have shaped a real catastrophic event into a moral lesson. But consider what is actually undeniable. Plato gave a specific location, and that location underwent real, documented, catastrophic submersion. He gave a specific date, and that date matches one of the most violent climate events in Earth's recorded history. And he described a civilization with capabilities that we now know actually existed during that period. That's 3 separate threads of historical and scientific evidence, all pointing in the same direction as a text written 2,400 years ago. So, is Atlantis really down there, somewhere in the Atlantic, waiting to be discovered? Nobody can say for certain. Underwater archaeology at those depths is extremely difficult and limited by the technology we currently have. But the question Plato raised over 2,000 years ago, the idea that an advanced civilization could have existed before recorded history and then been erased by a catastrophe, that question doesn't seem nearly as far-fetched as it used to. Maybe the real takeaway here isn't about finding a lost city of gold. Maybe it's about staying humble regarding how much of our own history we genuinely don't know, about how a text written 2,400 years ago keeps lining up piece by piece with modern discovery. If this video changed even slightly how you think about Atlantis, do me a favor and hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who love digging into mysteries exactly like this one. And if you want to keep exploring the unexplained, the lost civilizations, and the parts of history that don't quite add up, subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more coming. Stay curious, keep questioning the things you've been told, and I'll see you in the next video.